And what's good, y'all? This is the Alien Annihilators, Chapter 21, The Gorilla. Kenneth had thought about that gorilla footprint deep into the night and couldn't help but feel anxious. He felt like they were headed straight into a trap, the kind with killer gorillas in it. So early that morning when they woke up, So early that morning, when he woke up, he searched the area for big sticks, preferably large fallen branches. He found one not far from camp, a fallen tree branch, maybe broken off from a recent windstorm. He broke off 3 large branches from it and got to work carving a pointy tip on each of them with his pocket knife. His arm ached for 45 minutes of that. His arm ached after 45 minutes of that, but in the end he had 3 very pointy sticks, big enough to be medium-sized spikes. "Whoa," Rachel said to Kenneth once he got back to camp. She'd been awake for a couple minutes now and had some instant soup cooking over the fire. "Are we about to go to war with apes or something?" She smirked at the thought. "Something like that," Kenneth said, taking a seat next to the fire. Rachel's smirk receded as she sat down next to him. "Wait, what's that supposed to?" Rachel started. "I just think we need to be prepared in case there is anything dangerous in these woods." "Problem?" Kenneth asked. He wanted to tell Rachel about the footprints, but he didn't want to frighten her. Rachel shook her head. No problem. I like pointy sticks as much as the next gal." Silence for a moment. Then Kenneth said, "Wake Cleo up. We head out once we're done eating." After 3 hours of trekking through the rainforest, spikes in hand, Rachel's curiosity got the better of her. Kenneth was a ways ahead, scouting the way forward a bit. Rachel knew there was something Kenneth wasn't telling her. The spikes were the first indication, and now he looked an awful lot like he was being cautious of some predator lurking just out of sight. "So," Rachel said, "what did you and Kenneth talk about last night?" Cleo froze a bit. "Oh, just about life back at home, you know." "Oh, is that why Kenneth fashioned those spikes the next morning?" Rachel asked, a bit sarcastically. Cleo sighed. "I just don't want to scare you is all." "Are you gonna tell me what it is that has Kenneth so worried all of a sudden?" Rachel asked. She began to worry as well, but she needed to know what they were hiding. "Okay, fine," Cleo said, then explained what Kenneth had seen last night, the footprints. She told her about the picture he'd taken and how she'd identified them as the prints of a large and potentially hostile gorilla. "Kenneth obviously wants to avoid this creature at all costs," Cleo continued, "but he knew we needed to be ready if the beast caught us by surprise." Rachel nodded her understanding, barely moving her head. Her hands shook a little from fear, and she suddenly looked anxiously at her surroundings. She was scared, Cleo thought, but at least she's not ignorant of the danger anymore. After they had walked for another 3 hours, Kenneth put a hand up, stopping them. He looked at the path ahead, then the way they had just come from. "We're past the heart of the island now. Whatever we're looking for is back there. We just have to look harder," Kenneth said. Rachel groaned. "I can't believe I let myself get dragged into this. This is just bloody hopeless, and the best clue we have is to look for something unusual. That could be anywhere. That could be anything." Cleo tried to hear Kenneth's response, but it was blocked off by another sound. Cleo couldn't quite describe it, but if sparkly objects made a sound, then she was pretty sure that's what it'd sound like, and it was coming from... "Cleo!" Rachel shouted. breaking her from her thoughts. She grabbed Cleo by the arm and pulled her along. Run! It's the gorilla, run! She looked behind her and saw Kenneth posed for attack, wooden spear in hand, in front of a massive gorilla, thrice his size. Rachel, we're going the wrong way. The sound came from that way. We need to follow the sound, Cleo yelled. What the heck are you talking about? Kenneth agreed to buy us some time. We need to. Cleo pulled her arm out of Rachel's grasp and ran to Kenneth, pushing him out of the way just in time to miss a bone-crushing smash from the gorilla. Cleo hurriedly pulled Kenneth back on his feet, and they ran in the direction of the sparkly sound. The gorilla was after them. As they ran, Cleo began to hear the sound again. It was getting louder and louder, and Kenneth, we just passed it. We just passed the entrance to the alien Annihilators lab, Cleo yelled. How can you possibly? Kenneth began. I need you to buy me some time. I'm going to search the ground in this area. Just trust me, please, Cleo begged. Kenneth knew he didn't have much time to decide. The gorilla was only a dozen paces behind them, gaining fast. He thought about making a run for it, but he stepped up to the gorilla and stuck his spear as hard as he could into its chest. Surprisingly, it didn't land very deep, but it was enough to get the beast to fall on its knees and roar in pain and outrage. Meanwhile, Cleo was on her hands and knees, searching the ground carefully. She suspected there was a mechanism for opening some kind of trap door into the earth, but there it is, Cleo thought. There was a lever sticking out of the ground. It was just visible from inside a bush thick with leaves. Cleo ran to it, and once she knelt beside it, she pulled back on the lever. Suddenly, the bush fell down, as well as the lever, and before Cleo was a hole just big enough for her to fit in. Standing over it, she looked down. The bottom wasn't that far down. Roar! The gorilla pulled the spear out of its chest and bounded after Kenneth, who was racing to Cleo, eyes glued to the hole she'd found. Get in, hurry, I'll go in after you, Kenneth said urgently. Cleo hopped in and hurriedly got on her belly, crawling through the small passageway at the bottom. Once she was sure there was enough room in there for Kenneth, she turned around, watching anxiously for Kenneth too. He hopped in the pit now and began a rapid crawl through the small tunnel, and shrieked. The gorilla had grabbed his ankle. Cleo hurriedly grabbed the spear at her belt and stuck the ape in the upper arm, causing it to retreat from the tunnel. They both scrambled forwards until the tunnel opened up into a small room. Rock walls on all sides with only torchlights on the stony walls to illuminate the room. I need to take a couple deep breaths and relax a little, Kenneth gasped, sitting on a smooth rock near one of the walls. He rested his head against the wall. Cleo sat next to him, but Kenneth spoke first. I was nearly a goner, you know that. But you ended up buying us just enough time to make it to safety. Thank you very much. You saved us. Kenneth waved the thanks aside. I deserted Rachel to save myself. I'm not worthy of your thanks. The gorilla came after us, Kenneth. I'm sure Rachel had enough time to flee far away, Cleo said. I hope, Cleo thought to herself. Maybe you should have a look at that stone altar at the end of this cave. We need to start looking for the entrance to the alien Annihilators lab, remember? Right, Cleo thought. She got up, walked to the altar, and... Whoa, Cleo thought. In the rectangular piece of stone, there were maybe 200 cube stones in it, and all of them had white etchings on them. Chapter 22, The Stone Altar. Cleo wanted to examine the stone cubes more closely, but she was exhausted after that close escape from the gorilla. She should just retire for the night. Then maybe she and Kenneth could examine them in the morning together. She sat back down next to Kenneth. There's something quite interesting over there, and I guarantee it has something to do with getting to the alien Annihilators lab. We just need to figure out what to do to open the way forward. Kenneth nodded his understanding, but his mind was elsewhere, Cleo could tell. Finally, Kenneth spoke up. While we were running, away from that gorilla, you knew we'd passed a secret underground hideaway. How? Cleo thought about how to explain this, but even if she told him about the sounds she heard, she couldn't explain why she heard them or how she knew it was leading them in the right direction. When she voiced this thought to Kenneth, he said, I just hope whoever is in this alien annihilators lab can explain what the deal with that is. We just have to figure out the way forward. Kenneth got out some blankets and the two of them retired for the night. When Kenneth awoke the next morning, he saw Cleo standing over that stone altar. He got up and walked over. After Kenneth got a good look at all the stone blocks on it, Cleo said, most of the stones are blank, but some have white scratches etched into them. It has to be the puzzle mentioned in the book. What else does the book tell us about the puzzle? Cleo asked. Kenneth grabbed out his book and found the right page. The puzzle in question consists of 200 stone cubes, six-sided. When all stones are arranged to form the outline of the instrument light founded, then the way forward will open. Kenneth continued. It must be talking about the gauntlet of light. So all we have to do is make the outline in the shape of a glove, right? No, it can't be that simple. Let me see the book, Cleo said. Once she had the book, she returned to the chapter about ancient artifacts and there it is, the gauntlet of light. It is roughly in the shape of a glove to fit on one's hand, but its metal plates crawl up the forearm to fit more firmly on its wearer. Cleo continued, so we need to make the outline of a glove, but account for that extra detail the book mentioned. Great, then let's get to work, Kenneth said. Between the cubes having 6 sides and there being 200 of them, it was quite hard to find the right piece for each slot, and after 2 hours Kenneth said he was taking a break. Cleo was afraid that at the rate they were going, it would take a year for them to get all the pieces in the right spot. There was just too many possibilities on which side of each rock could be the right one. It took 12 hours for Cleo to finally take a break. She didn't think she got even one piece in its rightful place. She did the math in her head. 200 pieces, 6 sides. One side of each stone was the correct side. 5 were incorrect. When inserted at random, the probability of inserting it in the right slot was 1 out of 200, and that wasn't taking into account the fact that only one side was the correct one. Cleo was afraid she underestimated the time it would take. It would take forever. There were simply too many possibilities, the differences between the rocks too subtle, and if they got just one stone incorrect, then I can't believe we didn't get a single stone in the right place. We committed the whole day to solving that dang thing and got nowhere, Kenneth said in frustration. I guess this is it. I guess this is where we give up, and we can't give up. We need to keep trying. I just have a feeling that something is going to go our way, Cleo said. She couldn't explain why she felt that way, though. She just knew that they'd receive some kind of guidance relatively soon. I know you must think you're being heroic, but you're just being stupid now, Kenneth said. He said the last bit quietly, but it still hurt. Regardless, Cleo walked up to him and wrapped her arms around him and rested her head on his shoulder. Reluctantly, Kenneth embraced her as well. You trusted me the other day when we were fleeing from that gorilla. Your mind was telling you to run away and not trust me. but you did it anyway. And now we finally know how to get to the Gauntlet of Light. We just need to keep trying. I have a feeling we'll figure something out tomorrow. Something important. They broke the embrace, but Kenneth held her face close to his. He looked into her eyes and said, I trust you. I will always trust you, no matter what. This touched Cleo's heart deeply. You really mean that? She said, barely audible. Yes, of course I do. I I'm in love with you, Cleo, and if you told me to walk through hell, I would do it without question. I know you wouldn't put me through that if it were for no reason. Kenneth held Cleo's hand and escorted her to their sleeping area. Once seated, he placed his hands on Cleo's hips and pulled her to him until she straddled his lap, and Cleo leaned her head forward first, started the kiss deep. Chapter 23. Solving the Puzzle. The next morning Cleo stood over that stone altar. She had one of the stones in her hand and was studying it. She looked at the white etching on the stone. It was just a slightly curved white line, much like a lot of the etchings on each of the stones. But Cleo began to understand one important thing. There were differences between them. They were just very subtle. Cleo grabbed two of the most similar looking etchings and held them to a nearby torchlight hanging on the wall. Both curved slightly at the end, but Cleo could tell the curve of one was slightly more abrupt than the other. Cleo kept noticing more small differences in the stones, and used her judgment to decide which ones were the right fit for the puzzle they were solving. Cleo didn't remember when she'd woken up, but by 1 p.m. she had all the stones in what she believed was the right spot, except for just one stone. When Cleo woke Kenneth up and told him the good news that she was almost done with the puzzle, he had gotten up immediately and pulled her into his embrace, swinging her around. Once he was safely on the ground, he said, You really came through. I knew I could trust you. I knew it. We're getting... A thought came to Kenneth's mind, and his features darkened immediately. Cleo noticed this and began to ask, What's wrong? Did you put the last piece in yet? Kenneth asked, fear in his voice. No, it's right here in my hand. Why? Cleo began. I trust you, Cleo. You know I do. But if one piece is incorrect, just one, then, Kenneth began, and Cleo began to feel his fear. Then what? What haven't you told me? Did you read something in that book? Cleo grabbed the book from Kenneth's bag and looked at the section about the entrance to the alien Annihilators lab. Her jaw dropped, and she looked at Kenneth. Quoting the book, she said, If one single stone is not in its proper place, if one single side is not facing its rightful direction, the occupants will be locked in the cave for all eternity, and nothing will permit them to leave. Still looking at Kenneth, she asked, Why didn't you? I was going to tell you, I promise. You seemed so confident we were going to make it through this. I didn't want to frighten you, Kenneth said. Cleo thought about all she'd achieved that morning, then wondered if she would have been anywhere near as productive as she was had she been under the stress of knowing this great risk. She sighed. I know now, but you do know what this means, right? One of us has to take this risk, and it's going to be me, Kenneth said, cutting her off. This surprised Cleo, and she began to argue, but Kenneth continued. Cleo, I've been thinking about that other day when you said that sound led you to the entrance of this underground cave. You heard this when no one else did, and I genuinely believe this is a sign of something greater. It's a sign that you were part of a prophetic destiny from the very beginning, and you being stuck here will only hinder that destiny. Cleo wasn't sure she believed any of that, but asked, What if you're stuck here forever? I can't live without. Then you'll find another way to get to the Gauntlet of Light. I believe in you, Cleo. Now give me that one Now give me that last stone piece. Reluctantly, Cleo gave it to him, with the correct side facing up. She began to leave the cave, but turned around and threw herself at him, giving him a kiss that made everything worth it to him. Chapter 24. The Hostage. Cleo was outside the cave now. Kenneth had allowed the kiss to continue a while, but had to grab her hands and pull them off him when she felt she couldn't stop. Cleo couldn't believe Kenneth would take this risk for her. She knew there were great things at stake. The world itself was at stake. She had been willing to make the sacrifice, and still he had refused to allow her. Because of this, Cleo knew he was in love with her. Knowing that didn't make any of this easier. When she saw a bush rustle, she immediately grabbed out her spear and held it ready. Put that pathetic thing down, silly girl. We wouldn't want something terrible to happen to your dear friend here, a voice said. A woman stepped up from behind the bush, holding a dagger to someone's throat. Someone familiar. Oh my gosh, Cleo thought. It was Rachel. She was being held hostage by weapon down or the girl gets it, the woman said again. Slowly, Cleo placed the weapon on the ground. She even kicked it away, just so the woman didn't think she was gonna try anything. You guys are so damn hard to kill, you know that. When everything else failed, I had to try to explode that car, and even that wasn't enough. At first, Cleo had no idea what the woman was talking about, but then she realized something quickly. You're the one that chased us back at Rachel's house. You're an alien. She smiled wickedly. Yes, my name is Melinda, and I am even more powerful than my dear younger sister, Selena. You're lucky to have escaped at all, believe me. You're her sister, so she did send you to kill us. Tell you where you might be able to find us. Is that how you knew what neighborhood to look for us in? Yes, aliens can communicate telepathically, especially those born of the same mother and father. I was even able to tell her of a secret escape route from within that temple you trapped her in. She's in the process of escaping as we speak, and soon our beloved master will be resurrected back into his true and powerful self. Once he is restored, my master shall lay waste to entire nations once again, she said. When Cleo saw movement out of the corner of her eye, she glanced in that direction. It was Kenneth, at the entrance to the underground cave. Once he caught her eye, he gestured for her to come with him. Thank goodness, Cleo thought. Kenneth wasn't trapped. Her efforts in solving the puzzle hadn't been in vain. She wanted to go with Kenneth, but Rachel, did you hear me, girl? Melinda said, bringing Cleo's attention back to her. I said you're gonna come with me to my spaceship. My sister will escape that temple any minute now, and we have to rescue her from that planet she's stuck on, so come with me. When Cleo looked back to where Kenneth had been, he was still there, but there was someone else as well, and his eyes were closed in concentration. Ah! Melinda yelled. She took her dagger away from Rachel's neck and clutched her arm in pain. Cleo didn't know what had just happened, but she ran to where Kenneth was, and he said, Hurry, we don't have much time. We have to get out of here. Rachel was right behind them as they crawled back into the underground cave, through the entrance that had appeared behind that stone altar, and into a white facility with various rooms lining the corridors. The strange older man spoke up now. There's a helicopter carrier on the far side of the facility. The roof of the carrier can be opened manually. We need to get the hell. Melinda bolted through the entrance into the facility in alien form and let loose a massive spray of fire blazing right towards them. The man held up his arms, and the flames, they could not pass through. They were sent instead to blaze all sides of the corridor. Once the flame stopped, the man was able to quickly throw a roll of parchment on the ground before he said, "Take that, and get into the helicopter. You'll have to go without me. I'll hold off this alien." Kenneth wanted to argue, but it looked like they didn't have much choice. He grabbed the parchment, and they all started running, Cleo included, but the man placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "The gauntlet. It is under the passenger seat in the helicopter. You are the one destined to wield it, I am sure of it. Take good care of it, will you?" Cleo began saying she would, but the next second the man had his full attention on blocking another blazing inferno being shot at them. "Come on, Cleo, we have to get out of here," Rachel yelled, and finally Cleo went running after them. Chapter 25, The Heroine of Prophecy. They ran until Cleo's legs began to feel sore, and she needed to draw deep breaths to keep her lungs from collapsing. Eventually they came to a door at the end of one corridor. It was labeled Helicopter Carrier. Kenneth hurriedly opened the door and they all stormed in. In the room was a large open space with concrete walls and floor, and in the middle, "Okay, everyone, into the chopper, move," Kenneth yelled. Once they all got into the chopper, Kenneth pulled the door open and the girls climbed into the front seat. There were two beside the pilot seat. Kenneth rushed to the other side, hopped in the driver's seat, and grabbed out some keys within his pocket, which relieved Cleo. Cleo saw a button that said "Open Roof," and remembered that the roof to the carrier could be opened manually, so while Kenneth started the engine and started to get the chopper up in the air, Cleo clicked the button and the roof immediately started opening. Kenneth kept the chopper hovering just beneath the roof and tried to keep it steady. After several seconds of that, the roof was almost. When Cleo heard a door slam open, she turned her head towards the entrance and saw their older friend lying on the concrete. He had been hurled into the room somehow and looked unconscious. Maybe even worse. Kenneth had looked in that same direction, and when he saw Melinda come through that door, still in alien form, he knew they only had a few seconds before. When a massive spray of flame was blasted towards the helicopter, Kenneth immediately increased the speed of the chopper's blades, and they came shooting up, just in time to avoid being melted along with the entire helicopter. Kenneth heard the blades scratch against the side of the roof, but eventually they were clear of the roof and quite high in the air. Kenneth immediately shot the chopper in the direction they'd come from. Cleo had wanted to read that parchment Kenneth had gotten from the older man, but she had been so exhausted from the run that she'd fallen asleep in the helicopter. When she awoke, she was in a bed. She sat upright and looked at the alarm clock. It was 7 a.m. the next morning. Cleo recognized the room as Kenneth's room and walked downstairs, where she saw Kenneth and Rachel already seated at the kitchen table with breakfast ready. After they ate and Kenneth cleared the table, he placed a roll of parchment on the table, the one they had gotten from the men on Jagged Rock Isle. "We need to read this. We still don't know where the gauntlet," Kenneth began. "It's in the helicopter. The man told me it's under the passenger seat," Cleo said, which relieved Kenneth. He briefly exited the room and grabbed the gauntlet from where it lay in the helicopter, which he landed in his backyard. He then came back and placed it on the table, then sat. "Okay, let's take a look at what this parchment says. It's gotta be important," Kenneth said before unrolling it. The top of the scroll read, "The Gauntlet of Light," and beneath it was maybe 20 lines of cursive writing. Kenneth began reading. "My name is Brandon Brunt, and if you're reading this, then I am probably unavailable to tell you these things myself. I am a member of the Alien Annihilators, an organization that was first formed in 1220 in response to the rise of Lord Blazer, a powerful alien that threatened the world at the time. A very brave man, my ancestor Gregory Brunt, undertook an expedition into the harsh desert heat stroke in search of a rare item that would help the alien resistance. Before he had found it, in the ruins of an old abandoned village, Lord Blazer had infiltrated the organization Gregory worked for. Lord Blazer knew they were searching for a weapon to destroy him and threatened to wipe out everyone in the facility if the top researcher, Gregory's eldest son, didn't tell him who was searching for it and where he lived. After hundreds of casualties, the one man, the eldest son's co-worker, finally told him who the offender was: Gregory Brunt. Lord Blazer knew where he lived. He went to his house, where he arrived hours ago, intent in putting the gauntlet somewhere safe. He didn't know of the immediate threat outside. Sneaking into his house that night, he made a mental link so strong, Gregory had no hope of using the gauntlet against him. But through calculated persistence, he eventually broke the connection with Lord Blazer and used his own magic against him. Once stunned, Gregory knew he had seconds to grab the gauntlet from where it was hidden. What came next was the most horrific event of the era. The two engaged in full-scale combat, destroying homes and buildings. The collateral of Lord Blazer's destruction killed thousands, though Gregory tried to stop it. But at last the battle was won, and Gregory emerged victorious. However, one of Blazer's loyal minions teleported him away before Gregory could strike the finishing blow. It was then that Gregory donated the gauntlet to the alien Annihilators and told them the important feats one must perform in order for the gauntlet to fully trust its owner and lend its powers to them. Kenneth looked up at them, finally stopping to take a break. Cleo remembered what Brandon had told her about the alien Annihilators facility, that she was the one destined to wield the Gauntlet of Light. But she was curious. What was she supposed to do to earn its trust? Kenneth continued, "There will come a time when one descended from Lord Blazer's loyal minion will seek to claim the orb of power to resurrect their master. The orb rests in the lonely temple, and it contains power granted to it by Lord Blazer's father. To gain the gauntlet's trust, one must flee from alien captivity and lock the alien in the temple, allowing oneself sufficient time to find and retrieve the Gauntlet of Light. The heroine of prophecy, the girl Gregory prophesied of, will overcome all the trials before her to reach the gauntlet, calm the raging waves of Jagged Rock Isle, escaping a genetically enhanced super gorilla, and following the gauntlet's voice to an underground hideaway, where she will proceed to solve a puzzle deemed impossible to some, but after much critical thinking it will finally fit all pieces of the puzzle in their rightful place." Kenneth looked up at Cleo. "It's you, isn't it? You're this heroine of prophecy it's talking about. You're the only person in the world that the Gauntlet of Light will allow to harness its magical powers. You're the one destined to kill Lord Blazer." Even after everything Cleo had accomplished in the last week or so, Cleo didn't have much faith that she was the one destined to wield the gauntlet, but she had to believe in herself. Otherwise, Cleo slapped her forehead. "Melinda, yesterday she revealed a very important part of her evil plan. She's going to take her spaceship to the planet of the Lonely Temple. I bet you anything she's gonna bring Lord Blazer with her. They won't waste any time resurrecting her, I'm sure of it. As soon as Selena escapes with that orb, we need to get to that planet and fast." But how? But then an idea struck her. We need to get to Selena's spaceship now. And that's The Alien Annihilators, Chapter 25. And in the next chapter, you're going to be going on the spaceship and trying to stop Selena and Melinda from resurrecting Lord Blazer. And make sure to stay tuned for the next video and subscribe. And that's it for the video. Goodbye.